actually online. The rest of us had to put on pants to show up here. But Dr. Yvonne Lozano, I don't know what her choice has been, whether she's pants or pantsless, so hopefully she won't tell us. But our next presenter is a longtime friend of the Alzheimer's Association, Yvonne Lozano. She looks 14, but she's been around a little while. And she's a former board member of the Alzheimer's Association. She has her PhD in gerontology. She is a professor and department chair in the College of Arts and Sciences with the University of Arizona Global Campus. And she is going to talk to us today about the art of communication and management of behaviors. And so with that, I think we have Dr. Lozano on.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is everything? Go ahead, Eva. Okay, testing.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right. Thank you, everyone, and thank you again to the Alzheimer's Association. Always a great opportunity, and always happy to help in any way I can, particularly in any work that I can do for the association.
Recording in progress.
So today we're going to be talking about effective communication strategies. I'm particularly going to be focused on, obviously, in communicating with individuals with dementia. Our learning objectives for today, as you see here, I'm not going to read them, but explain the communication changes that can take place. We'll talk about some suggested verbal and behavioral messages and look at some strategies, particularly looking at different stages of the disease as well. So we want to ask the question, what is communication? Before I begin this presentation, I think it's important to mention that when you look at or read about or start to discuss what communication is, it's important to recognize it's not only important as to what you say, but also that you're listening. Sometimes that's hard for us to do and particularly when you're a caregiver and you're in the middle or the throes of trying to get something done or take care of the person you care for, whether you're a professional caregiver or you're taking care of a loved one at home. It's also about sending and receiving messages about your tone and about your attitude and your facial expressions and your body language. So communication doesn't just actually be a verbal level of communication, but also look at a way in which you're presenting yourself to the person that you're caring for. And if you see here, just in this little slide itself, I think this speaks volumes. Talk about facial expressions, making decisions, what kind of messages you're sending by your body language, or even looking at this person when you communicate face to face. So we're going to talk about some of that as well. People, as those individuals who have Alzheimer's and other related dementias, they lose their ability to speak and to be able to kind of, what the term is used to decode the language in the normal ways. Our expectations can be, well, we see this person in front of us and they appear to be somewhat normal, or we think that they understand us, but they're just giving you a hard time. Because they're giving you a hard time, they're acting as if they're not understanding what you're saying. But the more you start to learn about the disease, the more you start to learn about the process, the more that you'll start to understand the importance of communication. So now, as we look at the disease itself, we're going to talk about 3 stages and communicating through that disease as we move through each particular stage. So as you see here, you see the early stage, which is very mild. This person and the caregiver is able to communicate through language. And in some cases, the person can also make decisions about their future care. This would be a very good time when you see that to be able to think about how very difficult for a lot of people to try to make, because things are so rapidly sometimes changing or so significantly changing as we move along. Now let's go through each particular stage with these next slides. So in the early stages, like I mentioned, they'll have difficulty finding words, and sometimes you can see the changes and sometimes you can't, but especially in looking at difficulty finding the right words. I have to say, as a gerontologist, of the years of experience that I had after working in the field, I found that it's really important to try to find them, let them try to find those words themselves for a little bit, maybe try to do everything you can to, if you think about what that means for them, it can mean for a person that, I can still figure out that word, I can still figure out what that might be, but it's important on your end so far as communicating that you're very patient. It's going to take longer for them to speak or respond, so trying to rush them. What are you trying to say? What are you trying to ask for? What do you need? Do you need a fork? Do you need a spoon? Do you need a cup? And they're not able to find what those right words are. Again, you trying to provide that information for them so that they can make those decisions. And also sometimes they just withdraw from the conversation. They withdraw from the conversation because they don't feel like they have much to contribute, or that they just may be embarrassed. There's a lot of different reasons that might can happen, and more importantly, that they just really are not able to find those words to be able to communicate. And at times, this can cause them to react more emotionally than they did in the past, maybe become more irritated, or maybe even sad. So whether you notice the changes or not, those early communication is important in the beginning, but it's also important for you to develop what you hear others call sometimes a communication style. Kind of develop your rhythm of communication with the person as you get to know them, and as you get to know the changes that they're experiencing. But also, I just realized if you know them and you know who they are, and you know them well, and their personality, then you can start to kind of implement some of that with some of the other suggestions that I've given here. So, when we talk about connecting, I think this is probably, in all the times that I've done these presentations, particularly with this topic, or working with behavioral issues, in order to be able to really feel the sense that what you're doing is providing the person with the information they need to be able to provide them with what they're asking for, help them to be able to feel safe and comforted, and that you're listening to them as well. So you want to connect by asking directly how to help with communication, but also always looking at them face to face, not talking from behind them, not talking at a distance, not talking to them in another room. You want to keep your sentences clear and straightforward, and leave plenty of time for conversations. Find conversations that you realize are conversations, or topics, I should say, that trigger them to want to have these conversations. That kind of, you see, well, that kind of got them a little bit excited, or something that they really want to talk about. Maybe if you know enough about this person that you can say to them, maybe it's something to do with the sport. Maybe he or she really loves to talk about baseball. Maybe they really like to talk about the stars, or maybe they really like to talk about different kinds of restaurants. So find those conversations that help you to be able to connect with them. Leave plenty of time for conversations. This is something I remember early on in my career, and working at the geriatric site and the psychiatric unit with dementia patients, really having to work with physicians to be able to, and nurses and medical personnel, whether in hospitals or in clinics, and telling them how important it was to leave time for these conversations. Try not to rush the conversation. Try to provide them with everything that they need to be able to get the information that they need. Include the person in the conversations that are affecting him or her. This includes even going to the doctor's office, making sure that the doctor is connecting with that person, or anything else as well. So communicating in the early stage, also keep in mind avoid making assumptions. This is sometimes very difficult to do. I want to also say that those can include difficulty organizing their words and kind of not sounding as if they're not sounding logical, and sometimes also reverting back to a native language. This can be very common that we see often in this stage. And in using a lot of curse words. This was always something that was very difficult when I worked in the hospital for the staff to be able to manage, was the amount of cursing that they would hear others, some of the patients, and really helping the staff to understand that sometimes it would. Number one, there's two reasons here. One is it's due to the disease. The other part of it is this may have been their personality all along, and this was just something they always did, which really scares me in the situation. If anybody's going to be working with me at this age, as I get older, we'll probably find that I use a lot of curse words. And if you know me most of my life, you know that I always have. So just thought I'd throw that out. Relying on gestures instead of speaking. So it's always important to keep in mind to always connect with your physician when you start to notice these changes. Connecting gently. You know, I don't think that gentle connection. My students often ask me, is compassion something that you can learn? And that's a question I think we each have to ask ourselves. Can you learn to be compassionate, or if you already have it? If it's already part of who you are, part of your spirit, part of your personality, is it already there? You can really spot out who those people are who are compassionate, especially when you don't have any kind of healthcare done. I think that sometimes you can spot that out. But it's important to kind of, as a caregiver, even if you're feeling tired and you're feeling exhausted, to try to be able to use those words that give that person a sense that you care for them significantly. The things that you can do also, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's always important to approach them from the front, say who you are, call the person out by name, always maintaining eye contact. And I know this is hard, but avoid criticizing, correcting, and arguing. Even if you have to put it on a little sticky note and put it on your refrigerator to remind yourself that that's not the reaction. And a lot of times, we're human beings. We're going to do these things. We're not going to be able to. We wish we could do it different. We wish that we could take back something that was said. But you start to pay attention to your own tone and take your time. But let's go back a second to the avoiding criticizing and correcting. This is easier said than done for anybody. Even with someone who doesn't have dementia, it's still very difficult to do because it's just our natural state for some people to be able to want to be able to correct, especially if you hear someone that's saying something or doing something incorrectly. And arguing too, especially if you've had a marital relationship with that person, with your spouse, or with a partner that you're not caring for. I think there's sometimes that tendency. But also, as that starts to worsen, a lot of times what we see is that's happening because of caregiver stress. That there is a need for a break. And that's also for some of you, that's also easier said than done. But I think it starts to recognize that what you're able to manage and that your stress level is so high. And we all know that when our stress level increases, our level of irritability and agitation and frustrating, and then the person with Alzheimer's will just start to kind of withdraw from the conversation, or maybe even become irritated. So you want to respond to the emotions behind the statement. So you see a certain emotion that's come forward, and you want to say to them, you want to say to yourself, what is it that they're trying to convey to me? So you have to figure out what the person wants, and that you only can do that by paying close attention and starting to learn the different behaviors of the person that you're working or that you're caring for. Keep it very slow and very basic, and I think just what I just mentioned a minute ago is exactly what we're telling you there. The more you slow down, the less resistance you will encounter. And I know that some of you have met individuals in your life, I don't know very many, but I have met a few who are always very precise and slow in their communication, wanting to make sure that they completely understand. And as a professor and a teacher, this is something I have to work on a lot, because I just assume that everybody understands what it is of what I'm saying, and that they got it after the first conversation or the first instruction, and then everything's going to be fine after that. But that's not always the case. You want to use short sentences, basic words, and speak very clearly. Be specific. You can even offer a choice at the end. Are you ready for, would you like to have an apple? Is it time for you to have a snack? Would you like to go to the bathroom? What would you like for breakfast? I think is just asking those questions and getting a response. So you want to give multiple cues you're talking about. I talked about this a little bit at the beginning. Visual cues, avoid any sudden movements, give some visual cues to help prompt what it is they're trying to communicate with you, or just to be able to engage with them. Put your answer into questions. If you can give them as many cues as you can to communicate, providing visual cues and gestures. You can even write things down for them. Offer answers to your questions, and then continue to repeat it. You want to turn anything negative into a positive. And again, I think what's important to mention here is we have to remember that we have to be very focused on what the personality is of that person, what we know to be their personality, and what they might be experiencing. If it's a behavior issue, such as that comes out that when they start yelling or become frustrated or maybe even throw things, we have to understand what the behavior is. What's underneath that behavior. And remember, behind the anger, there's need, and I believe that to be true in most cases. So you want to repeat information, even though you have a lot of cues and a lot of reminders, and you have to keep repeating what it is. This is just the nature of your response as a caregiver, but also the nature of the diminishment of their cognitive abilities. Again, responding empathetically and reassuring. Reassurance is critical. Join the person's reality. The facts are less important than the person's feelings. Saying things like, that's not what I meant to say. You're not hearing what I'm saying. This is what I said. It's almost as if to prove that they misunderstood you so that you can prove that you are right. You can prove that they didn't understand. So it just kind of, again, goes back to removing yourself from that need to prove yourself to be right, which is probably a common issue for a lot of people, including myself sometimes. Provide reassurance that you're together and safe, and that you're there for them, and that you're there to help. And always be open to making adjustments to the situation. And then redirect the person. I think redirect is also another key component here in providing that's a great suggestion as regards to communication now is concerned. As we think and we move into the later stages, obviously communication is going to be reduced significantly. You are going to notice that. Possible responses to familiar words and phrases are also going to change. There's a possibility you'll have a response, but there's a chance that you won't. Not only will they use a few words, but he or she will, the point is they still need to communicate. They still need to feel that sense of compassion. They've lost many functions by this stage. Usually just your presence there and the fact that you're connecting with them are much more important than doing something specific for the person. So in this case, this is a little bit different when you look at the other two stages. In this situation, the person is just looking for you to be there for them and to feel that connection. Remember that they're an adult. You're working with an adult. They have a sense of self still. That this continues throughout the stages. A lot of people forget that and begin to treat them otherwise. You want to remember their history. If you know their history and where they were born, where they were raised, what their parents' names were, what their siblings' names were, what they did for a living. You want to help them feel some sense of connection, but also feel some sense of happiness, those little small moments of joy to bring in that you can infuse into their life. I think often we forget that we forget that just those little few minutes that we can bring that into a person's life can mean the world to them. Keep talking, but use familiar words and names and phrases, just kind of like I mentioned a minute ago. But also remember to use the 5 senses. This is a great way to connect with somebody at these stages, using touch and sight and sound and smell and taste, remembering all of that. I think it's, you can think about a food that maybe was their favorite food that you prepared. They may not recognize what it was, or that it was even their favorite food, but maybe maybe the smell can help them to be able to create that sense of reminiscence for them. Talked about connecting through touch. Here's some ideas of what the 5 senses. Feel different fabrics. Identifying the stages. The shapes by touch. These are just some ideas. I think massaging hands with lotion. Maybe even visitation with animals. You see a lot of this in Alzheimer's facilities, memory care centers, where this is some of the tools that they use. I know that there's probably a lot more here that we could go over, but I think it's important for you to connect at this point, at any point, always hoping that you're connected with the Alzheimer's Association to get support, to get some of these ideas that I'm talking about today. Just holding the person's hand, making them feel safe, making them feel comfort, stroking their arms, maybe their back as well. Just some ideas here. You maybe look at some bright pictures, maybe look at some old pictures of them growing up, looking at photo albums together, watching birds or looking at aquariums, I think are also something that you can think about. Anything from the past, maybe going outdoors, getting the sense of nature. I think this is something that's often avoided for a variety of reasons, but it's also important. To maybe if it's not 100 degrees in San Antonio, but to be somewhere where you can get the sense of outdoors, hear nature, hear the noises, hear the birds, hear the wind, feel the wind, whatever it might be. It's also very important. So you want to bring music into their lives, connecting, listening to familiar music, listening to recordings, as I mentioned, sound of nature, listening to songs. But I want to go back to the familiar music. And there's been those of you who have been in the field for quite a while, or those of you who are caregivers, may recognize some of the research in regards to music. But it's so important to bring that whole sense of them feeling that, again, that moment of joy, of music that they have brought to their lives. I know that for some people, music is very important in our lives now, and listening to it. Every single song brings back some, or not necessarily a new song, but even old song brings back some sort of memory for all of us, or a time in our lives, and it just those are part of what gets us, it makes us feel good about that song, makes us excited to hear that song, and I've always thought, interesting is going to be in Alzheimer's or dementia facilities where the music is going to change as decades and generations of individuals move through, and how different that's going to be for all of us. And also, I want to mention just one thing that is said is that let the person hear the gentle tone of your voice. This is the last part of this list here. And you hear this over and over again about being gentle, about such as next meeting. You guys want to mention that? I saw that yesterday. I just wanted to tell everybody in case any of you guys out there would be in that situation. Favorite foods, homemade goodies, popsicles, flavored drinks. I want to say that this is something you can talk to your physician about in regards to what they can or can't have, but I think it's important to say that this is not a point about thinking that maybe popsicles have too much sugar in it. I think, well, again, I'm not a medical doctor. I do think it's important that it's a way of continuing to connect with them in later life. You want to make sure that they can swallow safely, so all of that has to be in place, but those are all the considerations. Always make sure you're checking with someone, but don't ignore the importance of it. One of the things that was common is joining the person's reality, connect, and being gentle, but also understanding what you can and cannot change, and how important it is for you as a caregiver to take care of yourself, to reach out and ask for help, to remove the sense of feeling like you're the only person who can do this and can do it well and can do it right. This is a time to put down your sense of needing to be in charge and not letting others come in, even though they may not do things the way that you think it should be done, or that you want it to be done, but accepting people who are saying to you, I can come and help, and not putting any stipulations on that. Demonstrating your respect and connecting to them with feelings. And for when you're tired and when you're frustrated and when you've had it, and you're stressed beyond belief, all of these things are very difficult to be able to do, because we're human and because you have emotions too. But with the rest, if you can get with the rest and the support of caregiver support groups, of the Alzheimer's Association, which is available 24/7, with all of those things, I think you can be able to re-energize yourself. You can find your own moments of joy so that you can be in a place where you can be your very best and do your very best. But you can't do that if you're not taking care of yourself. Recognize the effects of your moods and actions is what this says. But I think I pretty much have discussed that, but I think it's important to keep those things in mind for yourself. Try to understand the source of the reaction. I can't tell you how many times in my career, and I continue to hear people say, I know that he knows what I'm saying. I know that she knows that frustrates me, and that's why she's doing it. I think that they're doing these things on purpose. Those are the kind of things when you start to hear yourself say those things, it's important for you to reach out and find someone to help you. Help meet their needs while you're soothing and calming the person. There's kind of this underlying, sometimes anxiety, even if it's mild anxiety or frustration or being scared. You know, it's got to, if you think about how scary it must be to be losing your ability to be able to function cognitively, not being able to recognize people that are walking in the door, not being able to recognize one room from the next in your own home, going into a new place, when all of those things begin to happen for that person, it's important for them to feel a sense of comfort and safety, and that really comes from either the professional caregiver or the personal caregiver. I think now we've gotten to the helpline. I think someone put that in the chat as well. It's a 24/7 helpline. It's a free service. It's available around the clock, 365 days a year. They have bilingual staff and translation over 200 languages. So just make sure that you write this number down and reach out. You know, it's really easy for those of us who do these presentations or in the association or other professionals to come in and give you these suggestions and say, here's some great ideas, here's some things you can do, here's what you can do for yourself. they're caring for. But again, I say the reason that these caregiver seminars or symposiums even come about is because we recognize the level of stress and the level of support that each of you need, and to be able to get through the day. And I always like to somehow in my presentation go back to a presentation I heard many, many years ago, and a geriatrician who was also worked quite a bit with the Alzheimer's Association back when. And I know I'm making myself feel like I'm 108 years old, but you know, we're all getting there. But he said in a course of a 24-hour period, it takes 7 people to take care of one person with Alzheimer's disease. That's right, I say that right. It takes 7 people in a 24-hour period. And sometimes it's only you, one person. So those are things for you to consider when you start to think about how much support it is that you particularly need, and maybe even reaching out and maybe making a decision for that person to go to a memory care center or to a facility. I mean, those are all kinds of things that everybody will have to face that has a loved one or someone they're caring for that's been diagnosed with an Alzheimer's-related dementia. So keeping that in mind as well. I believe there's another slide here on education programs. Education program like today, there's different types. They're free, they're online, they're e-learning, and anytime it's free, I mean, why not take advantage of that too? But these are some, you heard the talk today on effective communication strategies, and there's a list of those that are available for you. Next slide, please. There's also a community resource finder. And those of you who are there in person, if you're not there in person, you can always reach out and try to have some of this sent to you, or you can reach out and try to find those online too. So make sure that you are connected, not only learning how to connect with the person you're caring for, but learning how to stay connected. And I think the next slide, other ways of connecting with ALC Connected, which is alcconnected.org. And when facing on the next slide, when facing on Alzheimer's disease, there's a lot of things to consider. So you're like, what did she say about this and what did she say about that? Next slide, please. Using the Alzheimer's Navigator will help you to be able to manage some of this, providing answers, giving you kind of a personal action plan based on what you need. Remember, everyone has their own personality, everyone has their own needs. Not every caregiver is the same, not every person with Alzheimer's is the same. We all came into this situation with our own individual personality characteristics that really add a different flavor to taking care of ourselves. Next slide, please. I think it's really just any questions at this point. I know I want to mention.
Okay, I'm here on, this is Byron. I'm going to try and not get you on the microphone too. So we can take questions. I think we have Ginny Funk here with the Alzheimer's Association. Can run around the room and then I'll manage the microphone for the answers.
Does anyone have a question for Dr. Lozano? Questions or comments?
Yes, we have that here.
Thank you, Dr. Lozano. My question is there anything that the Alzheimer's Association may have in order for caregivers to communicate best with their doctors or clinicians? That sometimes is missed. I know health literacy is a big issue in San Antonio, and how can we best prepare for those visits for our parents?
Well, I'm going to probably let Ginny Funk answer some of that, but I know that there is, I think, questions you can ask your physician. I'm assuming that's what you might be asking, specific questions to ask, particularly as you start to see different behaviors occur, you start to have different questions about different kind of symptoms that you're seeing, wanting to know if they're related. I'm assuming that's what you might be asking. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, we do, and I would say wholeheartedly call our local office or call that helpline number, the 800 number. We definitely want to assist. That's a very common question. One, how do we even get to the doctor's office with our loved one? And two, once we get there, you know, how do we're sometimes even given a sliver of time and we have so many questions. So the number one thing is certainly to write things down. I would say one of the best things I ever did was start a journal. I went through probably 10 of them, but always having something written down so if you are short on time, you can really go back to, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm concerned about, what should I do?
I know that you've given us the resources with the Alzheimer's Association. I'm sure that there's other resources out there in the different booths. But when you're talking about middle Alzheimer's and you're talking about kindness and patience, I really find that there's not enough talk about, or I know this is not the topic of the conversation today, but about more complex interactions. Because on one side you said that these are still adults, and on the other side we're all caring and giving and trying to be patient, but I've had a father that I had a very difficult time, and I know a lot of us have, tried to get them to stop driving, trying to deal with their finances, and they can get enraged and want to do what they've been used to doing for all their lives, and we are put in a position that it sometimes even becomes violent. And it's something that's not easily solved by being kind and understanding or making eye contact. And if you would give me some direction to some other type of literature that would delve into those problems, more deeply, greatly appreciated.
That's such a, and first of all, it's not uncommon. Let me just say that. Second of all, it is another presentation that is often done with the Alzheimer's Association in managing difficult behaviors. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to really cover that. Maybe cover later today. But in reference to, you mentioned a lot of things, but let me just kind of pinpoint a couple. One is the driving and those kind of situations. This is when you reach out. One thing that I think families sometimes, and you may have thought about it, they may have forgotten about it, or it may not have crossed their mind, but reaching out to a physician to be the person that tells the person with Alzheimer's that it's time to not drive. And there's some other things that can be done legally to make that happen with the Department of Public Safety. So it doesn't have to be the family that is providing that news, and it's someone on the outside. That's one suggestion. You may have already done it, but and I'll let you can probably talk to somebody there today. But also in regards to aggressiveness and that type of behavior, which would be difficult for anyone to manage. And this is a great, this can be seen at times where number one, always make sure that you're safe and that person's safe. And needing to maybe also talk to a physician about being able to manage those behaviors. Finding someone who can maybe help that person that's maybe outside, not only outside of the family, where maybe there's someone inside the family that can help with that too. And I know, and it's really difficult without being able to, I think for me right now, to be able to be there and probably give a lot more suggestions, because I think it's important. I don't know if you're connected with the Alzheimer's Association through caregiver support groups, trying to talk with other caregivers and how they manage those type of situations. I find that other caregivers sometimes are your best. Sometimes the best to talk to, and those support groups and the individuals who facilitate those in the association, it's important to connect with them as well. There's no reason to be in that violent situation, no reason to be in that, and having to deal with that in a regular basis without, it's important to connect with someone else to help you to manage those as well. Medically, maybe medicinally, if it's that serious, or if it's recommended by him. Jenny, anything you want to add to that?
I would just that there were so many, I'm so glad that you talked about that, because that really is, there are so many suggestions that we can give, but when you really get down to it, some of this gets so incredibly heavy and hard, and we have a lot of resources on driving, for instance, and it starts off with, how to have that conversation with your loved one and they're a little bit mad at you, and then it just progresses from there. How about when it gets to the point where they absolutely refuse, they're, yes, physical with you, sort of what do you do at that point? So we have tips and suggestions all the way up to 3 o'clock in the morning, disabling the car, moving the car. We have just, the number one thing I would say is call us so we can talk about your specific situation and try to give you any specific tips we can on, have you tried this? Have you tried this? Is there something else? How can we possibly help in this situation? Because I promise you, you're not the only one that's going through that. Many of us have also, and it's really hard. So the first part is talking through it, and then let us try to do anything we can to try to help in this situation. It's so hard, and it's just scary, especially for those of you when it's a spouse, absolutely. For those of you as an adult, taking care of a parent, when this is your parent, you're trying to get your parent to do things that they don't necessarily take too kindly to hearing it from an adult child. So there's so much to it, but hopefully we can help in any possible way.
There's online, there's a question.
From the online community, we have a question. How do you respond if the person still thinks their spouse is still alive?
Well, the first thing that came to my mind when I heard the question was that I this was something that happened not often, but on occasion when I worked in the Geriatrics, like I commuted with dementia patients, and I think that it's going to be different every day. I think that if you heard in the communication when I talked about being in their reality, sometimes while it doesn't need to be long conversations with that person, you have to think about what that person is meaning behind the fact that they believe they're still alive. They might be living in that part of their life cognitively in that early part of their life where they did believe that person was alive. So you can have that, they might be missing her, or might really truly believe that, but trying to stay in that reality and still having, and there might be others who are going to disagree with me out there, but this is just my professional opinion. And yes, we all know that opinions are not facts, but I will tell you, in my experience, I've seen that keep staying in that reality with them and saying to them, gosh, well, tell me about your wedding, tell me about where you used to live, helping them to even though you know in your mind that that person is no longer with us, you can continue to help them to recall and reminisce about their life with that individual person. You don't want to, I can think of some mistakes that we made when I worked in the facility with that, and that is to help them relive that grief that they felt at that particular time. Really, I think can create a very difficult situation. So, being in their reality, keep the discussion going, not necessarily telling them that your wife's no longer here, she's no longer here, but having them to talk about her in a different way to help them to work through that grief.
Yes, we do have one question from the online audience. My mother died Thursday morning. My dad has early to moderate onset. They had a routine, breakfast at the table. My dad is struggling, and I don't know how to help him.
First of all, I'm so sorry for your loss, and again, this is early. I mean, he's going to go through grieving. We have to remember that because the person has Alzheimer's or a form of dementia doesn't mean that they're not going to grieve. And so that routine, if possible, and it may not be possible, maybe impossible now, but if possible, my first recommendation was, again, let them reminisce about that person, talk about that person, but also whoever's caring for them to let them know what's happened recently, and that you're going to see some changes in behavior. Obviously, would be true for anyone, and emotions are going to be different, and they're still going to be going through the grief process as well. I don't want anyone to forget that because someone has Alzheimer's that they're not going to go through that grief process. They're going to miss that person significantly. Do your best to have a schedule that even kind of looks like the schedule that they have.
All right. Excellent, excellent suggestions, and thank you, Dr. Lozano, for such a wonderful presentation. It was very helpful. So, we thank you. Any closing words from you, Dr. Lozano? I'll give you the last word.
I couldn't be there, and I'm instead of joking, say I was in witness protection program. I say I thought that was kind of funny, but I hope you guys have a wonderful day. You're in good hands, and I miss seeing all my friends and colleagues there too as well. Y'all do not forget how important it is for yourself as a caregiver to connect to this organization and all that they can do for you. So have a wonderful day.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And so with that, we're actually going to have a 15-minute break, just a comfort break. Restrooms again are just out this back door and to the left. For our folks online, again, find your own restroom. And we will see you guys back here